Okay, today, let us step softly into a morning long past, one that began not with the clamor of alarm or the rush of obligation, but with breathless stillness and the reverent hush of ceremony. Some mornings do not begin with sunlight, but with the gentle cadence of ritual and the soft rustling of silk draperies stirred by unseen hands. At Versailles, where sovereignty was woven into every brick and golden flourish, the onset of day adhered not to the chaotic rhythms of the world, but to an orchestration of deliberate grace. The palace did not awaken, it unfolded. The first light filtered through layers of velvet curtains drawn just slightly ajar, spilling across parquet floors like whispered conversation. Beyond the great windows, the gardens remained cloaked in a fine veil of mist, their manicured hedgerows and latticed paths, yet untouched by the footfalls of man. Within, the silence was not absence, but presence pregnant with history, expectancy, and the weight of centuries. King Louis XIV, La Roi Soleil, lay still in the sanctum of his private chamber. His rest was not merely personal repose, but a temporal anchor for the palace itself. Versailles existed in harmonic relation to the monarch's rhythm, and morning began not at sunrise, but at his awakening. Until then, life remained poised, as though the entire court breathed in anticipation. The architecture of ritual governed the first gestures of daybreak. Within the high gilded ceilings and along the curved moldings traced with gold leaf, the still air carried a weight that was neither oppressive nor vacant, but reflective, a solemn quietude passed down through generations. It was in these suspended moments, before the first footstep echoed through the marble corridors, that time itself seemed to hesitate. No bells were rung, no announcements were made. Instead, the invisible gears of custom turned soundlessly. Beyond the chamber, in narrow halls tucked discreetly between grander passages, servants moved like shadows. Their motions were precise, but unhurried, lighting a lamp here, tending to embers there, never intruding upon the sovereign's rest, yet preparing the way for its eventual, inevitable conclusion. Outside, the palace gardens exhaled a gentle breath into the cool air. Lavender and boxwood held the memory of yesterday's sun, while the clipped topiaries and ornamental lakes lay in perfect stillness. The gravel paths sparkled faintly with moisture, and dew clung to the leaves like fragments of silver. Birds, tucked high in the chestnut branches, remained hushed, as though they too understood that it was not yet time. Back inside, the parquet beneath the king's chamber creaked imperceptibly as heat from the hearth warmed the wood. The embers had been tended during the night by invisible hands, keeping the space temperate and expectant. Nearby, a porcelain timepiece ticked softly beneath a glass dome, its rhythm patient, as if in deference to a larger and older pulse that dictated life within these walls. The bed itself, more a stage than a place of rest, was framed in gilded wood, draped in layers of embroidered velvet, and topped with a canopy adorned with sun motifs. Beneath these royal linens, Louis stirred only slightly, perhaps not yet fully awake, but no longer wholly asleep. This in-between was not merely biological, it was ceremonial. The moment when the monarch began to shift marked a metaphysical realignment of the entire palace. The first rays of sunlight, diffused through the east-facing windows, struck the foot of the bed and crept steadily upward. They touched upon carved moldings and golden flourishes, illuminating the room in a slow crescendo. The effect was theatrical, but never artificial. It was nature and design working in perfect concert, choreographed over decades to align with the habits of the man who now lay beneath that rising light. Versailles was a monument, not only to monarchy, but to temporality, to the sacralization of hours and the sanctity of structure. And here, within this hour, in this single room, the vast machinery of courtly life stood still. There was reverence in the silence, and the absence of action became its own profound kind of movement. Everything was poised, brimming, suspended. As the chamber gradually filled with light, soft shadows receded into corners, and the gold-leaf detailing on every surface began to glow with a quiet fire. Each object within the room, the writing desk, the inkwell, the folded garments prepared for the day, seemed charged with potential, waiting on the axis of one man's will. Servants beyond the door remained still, poised for the moment when ritual would permit their entry. Their presence was not a disruption, but an extension of the sovereign's body, trained to exist in harmony with silence. They, too, understood the choreography. There was no spoken instruction, only timing, tradition, and observation. A nod, a glance, a stillness, they were sufficient. When at last the king stirred, the change was imperceptible at first. A breath, a shift beneath the covers, a slight repositioning of the head upon the pillow. Yet this subtle gesture rippled outward. Servants attuned to even the faintest sound adjusted their posture, their eyes lowered. The walls themselves seemed to exhale. Still, nothing rushed. The ceremonial nature of waking did not allow for haste. The sacred quality of the transition from rest to rule had to be observed in its full breadth. Even in waking, the king did not simply return to the world. He re-entered it as its axis, slowly, with gravity. And so the day began. Not with a shout or a clang, not with bright lights or the bustle of voices, but with stillness, with care, with the knowledge that in this place, even the act of rising from bed was a kind of sacrament. As the golden room warmed and the great house behind it stirred ever so slightly, Versailles did not simply come to life. It breathed. And in that breath, a breath centuries old, and yet still suspended in time, we glimpse a different order of morning. One where each movement honors a lineage, each silence holds ceremony, and each rising sun mirrors the enduring glow of legacy. In this place, nothing was hurried. Because nothing ever truly ended, it only passed, softly, into the next hour of ritual, awaiting the touch of daylight again. As we step into the private sanctuary of King Louis XIV, we enter not just a room, but a stage set in golden stillness, where sleep lingers like a last whisper, and the atmosphere retains the deep hush of reverence. The royal bedchamber at Versailles was a space both intimate and ceremonial, a fusion of function and theatricality. The room was enshrined in opulence, walls upholstered in crimson velvet, the fabric absorbing light and deepening shadows in corners, rarely touched by sun. Each surface, be it gilded molding or polished wood, reflected the radiance of power in delicate glimmers. The ceiling, a celestial dome of painted cherubs and allegorical clouds, floated above the room like a permanent dream. Beneath that painted sky, the king slept, held not just by linen and feather, but by the unbroken fabric of ritual. The dimensions of the chamber emphasized order and grandeur. No element existed by chance. Tapestries lined the walls in deep folds, their woven mythologies adding silent narrative to the quiet. Oil paintings, encased in carved gold frames, depicted heroic allegories and pastoral serenity. But in the morning hush, their subjects appeared drowsy themselves, figures softened by candlelight, gazes drifting into tranquil stillness. Candles, though unlit at this hour, remained stationed along the walls and clustered near the great hearth. Their presence waiting to be called into glow offered a visual echo of the king's own liminal state, not yet alight with purpose, but near. They were sentinels of flame and form, ready to animate the chamber in their time, but now content to reflect the quietude. The bed, the centerpiece of this chambered world, was vast and elevated. Crafted of wood and gold, its height required steps, not just for access, but to elevate the monarch both physically and symbolically. Heavy drapes, adorned with royal emblems, hung from the canopy and shimmered faintly with the room's slow illumination. The bedding itself, a composition of damask, silk, and embroidery, was a topography of luxury. Here, sleep unfolded not in isolation, but within a space cultivated for devotion, observation, and control. Near the foot of the bed stood a large fauteuil, an armchair carved in elaborate rococo swirls and upholstered in pale blue. This chair, often used during the morning rituals, remained unoccupied for now, but its placement testified to the room's dual function as a place of rest and a locus of power where court ceremonies quietly began. It was not merely a chair, but a symbol of mediation between repose and authority, an emblem of transition. The windows, tall and narrow, were veiled with thick brocade that muted the morning light to a soft golden haze. Beyond them, the world stirred, but here, the chamber maintained its sacred stillness. Outside, birds called to one another across the misty parterre. Inside, the only sounds were the occasional pop of settling wood and the hushed rhythm of the king's breath. The silence was not a void, but a fullness, a weight of time suspended. Even the floor was part of the ritual. Inlaid with geometrically patterned parquet, it bore the silent prints of ceremonial passage. Courtiers, physicians, and servants had crossed it 1,000 times, but never rushed. Each footstep followed precedent, each route guided by etiquette. The floor did not merely support, it choreographed. Every creak, every echo had its place in the morning's slow unfolding. Against one wall, an armoire of dark walnut stood like a sentinel. Within it lay garments prepared for the morning ritual layers selected days in advance, folded with precision. Beside it, a small side table held an arrangement of books, a quill, and a single sealed letter, unread and resting until the morning rite permitted attention. These objects, though still, conveyed the slow hum of purpose awaiting permission to begin. On the mantel of the fireplace sat a row of timepieces, each slightly different in design, but aligned with the same temporal fidelity. Their presence was not decorative, but essential. Time, in Versailles, was a sacred measure calibrated not to the world outside, but to the sovereign's pulse. Their soft ticking was not merely mechanical, but ceremonial, a quiet count toward the moment the king would rise. Above the fireplace, a mirror wavy from age and silvering reflected the chamber not as it was, but as it lingered. In the soft pre-dawn light, the mirror held a vision of the room that seemed almost suspended in water, slow and blurred. One might pause before it, unsure whether they viewed the present or an echo. This was a space where reflection, both literal and symbolic, was always at play. The chamber was steeped in intentional quietude, a cultivated stillness that radiated outward. It was not the silence of emptiness, but the kind that holds meaning, like the final rest before a grand overture. Here, within these walls, time was stretched, slowed, and sanctified. Nothing stirred unless summoned. Nothing broke the stillness unless tradition allowed it. A table set near the bed bore the marks of gentle preparation. A ceramic pitcher, its contents still warm, a folded cloth, and a silver basin polished to a quiet shine. All awaited their role in the king's awakening. Yet for now, they remained motionless, patient as statues, participating in the room's hush. The items were not inert, they were poised. It was a chamber where action was a sacred thing not performed, but bestowed. Each item, from the embroidered canopy to the iron latch on the door, bore a kind of watchful awareness. Even in stillness, the room did not slumber. It waited. The walls seemed to listen. The air held a quiet expectancy. A faint draft moved through the velvet drapes as the outside world warmed. The light deepened, gold overtaking the silver blush of dawn. A fine dust, nearly invisible, caught in the beams stretching across the room, danced slowly, like memory suspended. These particles of light and time intertwined with the furniture, the fabrics, the very breath of the room itself. Soon, the ritual of the king's rising would commence. Soon, the space would host footsteps, whispers, the soft unfolding of silk. But not yet. For a few more minutes, the chamber remained suspended in the breath between dreams and duties. And in that breath, we linger. With quiet reverence, we observe. Because here, Even stillness tells a story one measured in golden dust, in waiting fabric, and in the hush of royal time. The stillness of the king's chamber, so carefully preserved, begins to yield at last to the subtle passage of time. Not with urgency nor noise, but with a quiet rhythm as if the palace itself were stirring from a shared slumber. The transition is seamless, felt more than seen. As the first signal of morning's ceremonial onset is heard a soft chime, faint yet deliberate, echoing through the private corridors beyond the chamber. It is not a bell meant to rouse or startle, but rather to usher in awareness. The chime is gentle, more a suggestion than a sound, calling forth those who know its meaning by heart. Down velvet-lined hallways and past ancient tapestries, a small cadre of attendants moves into position. Their steps are slow, calculated, and devoid of sound. Slippers mute their passage across the stone floors, and the weight of their responsibility presses not upon their shoulders, but into the silence they inhabit. These figures, trained in their roles with generational precision, do not knock nor call out. The king is not to be awakened as one might a common soul. Instead, their presence is the invitation, their silent preparation, the true commencement of the day. In Versailles, the king awakens not to stimuli, but to alignment of space, of ritual, of expectation, met by execution. Behind a panel door, tucked within the service walls, a silver tray is readied. Upon it, fine linens are folded, each square of fabric warmed before being placed with delicate care. A basin, newly filled with heated spring water, gleams beside a small vessel of aromatic soap, infused with herbs gathered from the palace's apothecary garden. These items are not merely tools of hygiene. They are elements in a sacrosanct rite, each movement choreographed to embody deference. One by one, attendants appear, entering the chamber not in haste, but as though carried by the same current that animates the rising sun. They glide, not walk. Their presence scarcely shifts the air, and yet the room, once suspended in stasis, now pulses faintly with the anticipation of form-taking motion. One servant draws back the curtain an inch, allowing a golden ribbon of morning light to pierce the velvet gloom. Another stokes the hearth, the embers responding with a quiet crackle that does not so much break the silence as infuse it with warmth. Still others tend to minutiae, the placement of shoes at the base of the bed, the alignment of fresh garments upon a chair, the replenishment of a nearby vase with stems of lavender and white rose. These actions seem humble, but together they compose a symphony of readiness, an invisible prologue to the king's first movement. Though the monarch himself remains at rest, his chamber slowly becomes inhabited by presence, like a stage lit gradually by dawn. The rituals are neither rushed nor belabored. There is no spoken word, only the ambient notes of cloth brushing cloth, of silver touching porcelain, of breath passing through lips as still as marble. At the appointed moment, one attendant moves to the foot of the bed. He pauses, not to act but to acknowledge. This pause is not hesitation, but reverence. To serve here is to understand the sanctity of timing, that a moment too soon is intrusion, and a moment too late is lapse. With practiced hands, he reaches for the coverlet, and in a motion honed by years of tradition, folds it back slightly to indicate readiness. He does not wake the king. He offers the possibility of waking. In the hall outside, time bends. A distant clock ticks softly, aligned with every heartbeat inside the room. The palace does not demand, it permits. It does not insist, it prepares. And so, while the world beyond Versailles may rush toward its day, within these gilded walls, time flows like warmed honey, slow and thick and sweet with purpose. The air itself shifts as more light seeps through the edges of the windows. The temperature rises slightly with the crackling of the fire. Shadows, once motionless across gilded paneling, begin their slow retreat. Each element in the room adjusts, aligns, and accommodates. It is not the world that shapes Versailles. It is Versailles that reshapes the world. Still the king does not stir. Yet his stillness is no longer solitary. It is witnessed, honored, and anticipated. The chamber has become an instrument of awakening, tuned not to noise, but to nuance, as if the very fabric of the palace has begun to hum, low and harmonic, beneath the threshold of human hearing. Within the folds of the heavy curtains, motes of dust catch the expanding light and dance like notes on a parchment of silence. Their movement is the only kind permitted now, soft, directionless, eternal. It is in these tiny orbits of suspended matter that we glimpse the full majesty of restraint. Nothing rushes, for nothing must. In this space, even dust becomes ceremonial. A final adjustment is made. The room, now fully prepared, returns to its holding pattern. Servants step back into their positions along the periphery, hands folded, gazes softened. Their work is complete, for now. They do not await instruction. They await rhythm. The king will rise, as he always does, not to commence the day, but to fulfill its beginning. A murmur passes through the walls of the palace as another chamber further down the corridor begins its own preparations. The act is not singular but replicated, though none with quite the reverence of this chamber, the heart of Versailles. There, too, the hush expands, inviting time to stretch. Near the fireplace, a small gilt clock ticks gently. Its hands move imperceptibly, advancing not seconds, but moments wrapped in ceremony. A servant adjusts it slightly, not to correct it, but to align it more perfectly with the king's schedule, itself aligned to the turning of the sun. Precision in all things. Even silence must be timely. Another attendant, nearly invisible in the morning's softening shadows, adjusts the coals beneath a silver kettle, warming water not just for the king, but for the day's unfolding. Beside him, on a tray of beaten brass, lies a folded parchment bearing the date, a brief entry penned in script too delicate for haste. The king will read it when the time is right, and the day will begin with that quiet breath of ink. We remain suspended in these final moments before motion, before words, before duty calls, and the world expects. The gentle summoning is nearly complete, a ballet without sound or applause. Only presence, only poise. And in that moment before movement, we find ourselves held within the hush, not empty, but full, not paused, but deep in preparation. The gentle summoning is not a call. It is an arrival. Beyond the velvet-shrouded windows of the king's chamber lies another sanctum, less adorned, but no less orchestrated. The gardens and courtyards of Versailles are not mere decorations. They are extensions of the palace's breath, open-air expressions of its geometry, its grandeur, and its unwavering calm. Like a quiet organ echoing beneath the opulent skin of the palace, these spaces are vital to its soul. The first rays of morning sunlight, filtered through a soft veil of mist, stretch across the vast marble courtyards like slow streams of molten gold. Their warmth is tentative, more suggestion than embrace, but even in their infancy they flicker across stone balustrades, catch the folds of carved statuary, and dance atop hedgerows damp with dew. The air is thick, but not oppressive. There is a gentleness in its weight, as if the world has only half awakened and still remembers the quiet of night. From above, the order of the gardens emerges gradually, like music rising from silence. The symmetry of the French formal garden asserts itself with grace. Pathways shaped in precise alignment, parterres blooming in arabesques of green lace, fountains lying dormant in quiet repose. The boxwoods are clipped into shapes born of mathematics and metaphor. Each corner, each segment, whispers of intention, nothing left to chance. Along gravel paths still unmarked by morning's feet, a gardener has passed. He arrived before the sun and departed unseen. But his presence is known in the scent of fresh-cut stems, in the scattered dew rinsed from leaves, in the tiny, perfect trails swept clean of last night's wanderings. These traces are ephemeral, but they anchor the morning to its rhythm. Above, The sky lightens from lavender to ivory blue, the dome of morning unfolding with no urgency. It is a transition that takes its time. The courtyard, like the king, stirs slowly, in stages, as if waiting for its cue from something sacred and unseen. There is no rush-only arrival. Swallows dart between statues, slicing the mist with weightless precision. They perch momentarily on urns, on marble shoulders, on cornices carved in centuries past. They make no noise, or so it seems. Their presence enhances the silence, reminding one that quiet does not mean absence. Even in this cultivated stillness, life is everywhere, breathing softly beneath the surface. To walk here would be to step into a painting. But this is no static canvas. It breathes. It moves without motion. The hedges exhale a cool green aroma. The stone walkways, still damp from the evening's rest, hold on to a chill that dissipates gradually under the sun's growing light. Birds call from unseen corners, their tones soft and rounded, echoing just faintly off the vast stone facades. Shutters remain drawn on the upper floors, but behind them, a flicker of candlelight stirs. Inside the palace, humans prepare to enter the day. Outside, the earth stretches first. The contrast between the latent inner world and the already breathing garden is not tension, it is layering. Versailles does not awaken in sequence. It unfurls as one whole being, connected through shadow and sunbeam. Far to the east, the orangery glows. Citrus trees, arrayed in military order, bask in golden light. Their waxy leaves hold the memory of care, each one attended by hands that tend not only to plants, but to ideals, discipline, beauty, and balance. A faint, sweet fragrance lingers, drifting on currents too slow to be seen. Beneath the king's chamber, the courtyard bears the tracery of early light. Stone tiles glisten with dew, not yet burned away. Each block carries the memory of footfalls ministers in velvet robes, pages with scrolls in hand, noblewomen sweeping past. They have walked these stones for decades. But this morning, only the garden's breath remains. Statues stand in silent council. They are gods, muses, heroes, all caught in mid-thought, their marble softened by the moisture in the air. In this early hour, they do not inspire awe, they invite contemplation. Their gazes do not command, they observe. There is no measurement of time here, except the gradual rise of light. Bells do not chime. Clocks do not matter. What marks the moment is the changing angle of the sun, the dissolve of mist, the shift in hue from gold to pale cream across a column's side. Even this transformation is patient. A fountain sputters once in the distance, not awakened fully, but stirred. Its voice is breath through water, uncertain yet present. It will speak again later, when the king's gaze invites it. For now, it waits. Everything waits. But the waiting is not still, it is poised. The courtyard soul is rhythm, not action. A petal falls from an unseen vine and turns slowly in descent. A feather flutters in the low breeze, hesitates mid-air, and lands without sound. These movements are stories told in silence. They are the world's way of reminding itself that time, though subtle, is passing. From beyond the east wall, the hidden labyrinth sleeps beneath clipped yews. It is rarely entered now. But even in disuse, it holds power, a place meant not for navigation, but for reflection. Those who wander there do not seek answers, but perspective. In its winding paths, one does not get lost, but relinquishes the need to be found. A pair of doves stir in a linden tree. Their movement is minimal, a shiver of feathers, a blink. They make no call. Their presence is enough. All around them, ivy shifts against stone. A balcony creaks gently in its old iron bindings. The wing beat of a heron rises from somewhere near the moat. These sounds are not events. They are affirmations. The palace is not waking, it is remembering. By the reflecting pool, lily float unmothered. Their petals rest on water like lace on silk. They mark the division between air and reflection, a surface both real and imagined. The pool holds the image of clouds that drift slowly above, reluctant to leave the scene. And still, the king does not yet stir. But the garden has already begun its morning liturgy. In each leaf and stone, it offers quiet homage to what is to come, not in noise or grandeur, but in breath and light. The courtyard's breath continues, long and slow, like the first verse of a hymn sung before the congregation enters. In this stillness, there is motion. In this silence, a music, not one of notes or melody, but one composed of presence, the rustle of vine, the whisper of gravel, the sigh of stone warmed by sun. Here, in the open air beneath the gaze of unseen eyes, Versailles does not awaken. It becomes. The first true motion within the chamber of the king is not grand or commanding. It is quiet, reverent, almost meditative. The ritual of cleansing, long before it came to be regarded as a mere function of personal hygiene, was imbued with meaning in the world of Louis XIV. In the king's Versailles, even the act of washing one's face was theater, a rite enacted within the grand cathedral of royal routine. From the recesses of the palace, attendants emerged like mist, each bearing a necessary object in the choreography of the royal ablution. A silver basin, polished until it shimmers like moonlight, is balanced carefully upon a tray, accompanied by a matching ewer of steaming spring water. The metal hums faintly with heat. Nothing is rushed. Time here is elastic stretched to accommodate exactitude, reverence, and poise. The towels come next, hand-woven from the softest linen, embroidered at the edges with the fleur-de-lis. These too have been warmed by the fireside, folded precisely, stacked in order. Each square of cloth awaits its moment, with the solemnity of pages awaiting their summons. Every detail has been considered in advance, not just for function, but to sustain the aesthetics of routine. In the chamber, still dim with morning hush, the hearth crackles gently. It is not the main source of warmth, but a companion, casting flickering golden light upon the gilt furnishings and soft tapestries. Shadows stretch gently along the ornate floor tiles, giving the sense of a space only half awake, suspended in sacred stillness. The scent of smoke mingles with beeswax and lavender. When the king begins to stir, his presence does not disrupt this quiet order. Rather, it completes it. The attendants, having prepared the space, now assume their roles. One approaches with the ewer, pouring the warm water into the silver basin with a slow and careful motion. The stream is steady, a thread of steam rising into the morning air like a spirit unspooling from the vessel. No words are spoken. The ceremony is not narrated, but performed, and all who participate are fluent in its silent vocabulary. A folded towel is extended. Another attendant presents a porcelain vessel containing a blend of scented soap, crushed rosemary, lavender, and mint aromatics gathered from the palace gardens and compounded by skilled hands. Each ingredient, sourced from the king's estate, is a token of Versailles' self-sufficiency and harmony with its surroundings. A king touches the water first with his fingertips. The heat is perfect, neither too tepid nor too bold, as if the very temperature obeys him. The moisture clings briefly before running off, trailing down his hands and wrists like threads of glass. He lifts a towel to blot the water, pressing the fabric to his skin in slow, circular gestures. This act, as always, is carried out in an atmosphere of quiet respect. There is something meditative about this process, as though the king is not so much cleaning his body as aligning it with the day's sacred geometry. The attendants move in harmony around him, replenishing the basin, offering fresh towels, adjusting the folds of his night garments as needed. Each act is both practical and reverent, a gesture of service and an acknowledgement of place. It is not only the king who is cleansed, but the space, the moment, the unfolding of the day. The ambient air is subtly infused with the scent of the soap. Its herbal character mingles with the faint aroma of burning wood from the hearth and the crisp linen that has been drying nearby. The scent profile of the chamber becomes a kind of olfactory prelude to the day. In the silence, one might imagine these fragrances taking shape, weaving through the air like tendrils of calm. The rhythm of the ablution continues with the cleaning of the face, the brow, and the neck. No part is neglected, yet none is hurried. The motion of cloth against skin is a slow whisper, like wind brushing the petals of a closed bloom. It is care distilled into contact. The towels are not discarded, but replaced delicately, folded away to be laundered, and pressed anew for the following morning. The act preserves dignity, tradition, and memory. The king never rushes through these acts. His awareness is inward and outward, at once anchored in the sensation of water and cloth, but also in the presence of the space around him. Mirrors within the chamber reflect not vanity, but continuity, a reminder that this act was done yesterday and will be done again tomorrow. It is the calm repetition that comforts, the slow return to form. Each movement performed by the attendants is executed with practiced grace, creating a choreography of civility. Nothing breaks the solemnity, not even a misstep, for every gesture has been rehearsed over years, passed down from attendant to apprentice. The lineage of service here is long, stretching back generations. In this moment, it converges in stillness. When the cleansing is done, the bowl is emptied discreetly, the remaining towels removed with practiced hands. A brief moment of stillness follows, as though the air itself pauses in appreciation. The hearth flares briefly, sending a ripple of gold along the lower walls. A servant adjusts the curtain another fraction, allowing the soft morning light to fall more fully across the room. It touches the king's face, freshly washed, serene. He is now ready, not merely in body, but in presence. His gaze is quiet, his hands rest upon the arms of his chair, and the ritual has transitioned him from slumber to sovereign, gently and without disruption. The final touch is a comb passed gently through his hair, not for display, but for order. The comb, carved from ivory and polished smooth, glides through each strand like a breeze through silk. Another towel is pressed beneath the neck, not because it is needed, but because tradition requires it. Even this seemingly minute gesture is infused with centuries of custom. At last, the basin is covered, and the water poured down a silver drain designed to carry it away with dignity. The act is complete. The chamber is once again still, the only sound the soft click of porcelain returned to its place, and the dull warmth of fire meeting the grate. No applause follows, only the continuity of breath and shadow. The linens are folded again by gentle hands, their texture retaining the memory of warmth. The soap is covered, the basin wiped, and everything returned to its immaculate readiness for the following morning. No movement is wasted, no moment without grace. All returns to equilibrium. This was no bath, no indulgent soaking. It was a rite, an anointing of a day, not yet lived, a restoration of clarity, and a quiet invocation of readiness. And though the king has spoken not a word, every attendant knows the result. The day has begun, not with fanfare or proclamation, but with warmth, water, and an unwavering reverence for the rhythm of morning. As the gentle ceremony of cleansing comes to its serene conclusion, a quiet anticipation begins to rise within the chamber. It is not marked by sound or movement, but rather a subtle shift in atmosphere, as though the room itself exhales in preparation. Now begins the next part of the morning ritual, one steeped in dignity, tradition, and the unspoken rhythm of royal presentation, the donning of the king's robe. Within the adjoining wardrobe chamber, attendants await. Each one is dressed in livery, bearing the colors and insignia of the court, their expressions composed, hands steady. One carefully lays out the robe on a long velvet cushioned bench, not simply an article of clothing, but a ceremonial vestment. The robe, woven from a dense wool silk blend dyed in a deep regal hue, is trimmed with embroidery stitched by hand, depicting the lily of France in fine metallic thread. It gleams faintly in the filtered morning light. The chamber grows subtly brighter now, as more daylight is allowed in through the carefully drawn curtains. It filters past the heavy brocade, revealing the contours of the polished parquet floor, the sheen of inlaid gold along the cornices, the slow drift of dust motes caught in its path. The hearth continues its murmuring burn, casting gentle warmth over the backs of the attendants as they make their preparations. The king, seated once more in his high-backed chair, watches with a gaze that does not command, but confirms. He does not speak. His silence, familiar and profound, gives gravity to the occasion. In this quiet, the act of dressing becomes more than mere attire. It is a sacred pageant repeated day after day, tying past and present through a consistency that defies the passage of time. Two attendants approach with practiced delicacy. One holds the robe aloft, its weight balanced between their hands, the long folds brushing softly against the velvet bench. The other prepares to assist the king in rising. The motion is unhurried. Every action proceeds as though suspended in air, untouched by gravity or haste. This is not a dressing, but an elevation. The king stands. The air shifts slightly. In the stillness, the rustle of the robe is like the sound of wind through distant leaves. Its interior, lined with silk, moves against the air with a weightless hush. The king extends his arms, a gesture almost liturgical in its composure. The robe is lowered onto his shoulders with reverence, the collar adjusted to lie perfectly across the nape of his neck, the sleeves guided down his arms with the utmost care. Once clothed, he becomes more than a man. He resumes the full shape of kingship. The robe, thick and heavy, rests upon him not as a burden, but as an inheritance. The fabric absorbs light and casts shadows along the folds, lending a gravitas to his figure that is both theatrical and sincere. The fastening of the robe is its own ritual. A silk sash is drawn across the waist, knotted with precision, its tassels brushed into symmetry. Buttons are adjusted. Cuffs are smoothed. Nothing escapes the scrutiny of the attendants' quiet diligence. Their hands, though constantly moving, seem almost detached extensions of the ceremonial space, rather than individuals. Behind them, another assistant opens a lacquered box. Inside lies a medallion, no larger than a plum, bearing the insignia of the royal house. It is pinned to the robe's chest with careful hands. The motion is swift, yet weighty, as though the medallion itself carries memory. The robe now drapes completely, settling into the form it has taken every morning for years. It is familiar yet always new, imbued with the freshness of morning and the depth of tradition. The air in the room seems fuller now, denser with significance. Each object, the chair, the hearth, the robe has played its role. The king takes a single step forward. The robe responds with a subtle sway, a soft shift in its heavy folds. The sound is faint, like the soft lapping of water against a stone edge. His feet, clad in leather slippers of understated design, meet the floor with barely a sound. The entire chamber listens. Across the room, a mirror catches his reflection, but it does not show a man surveying his appearance. Instead, it reveals a presence stabilized in time, the robe not as ornament, but as embodiment. He does not adjust it. He does not preen. He stands as though returning to a shape he has always known. A final towel, folded to perfection, is presented one last time. The king presses it lightly to his fingertips, dabbing any last moisture away. It is then removed, folded again, and set aside for laundering. This moment, so slight, concludes the rite. The attendants step back, their silence unbroken. There is no declaration, no final bell, yet the atmosphere has shifted unmistakably. Where once there was a man preparing to rise, now stands a monarch prepared to preside. The robe is not the cause of his authority, but the signal of its arrival. Morning has entered a new phase, one marked not by awakening, but by readiness. As the king begins to move toward the next chamber, his robe trailing in stately waves, the floor beneath responds with a barely perceptible creak, an acknowledgement from Versailles itself. The palace breathes with him. Each fold of the garment echoes through its hallways, a visual resonance that reminds all who observe that here, time is dressed in ceremony. As the great clock somewhere in the deeper corridors of Versailles continues its steady measure of the morning, a shift occurs beyond the walls of the royal chamber. The transition is almost imperceptible, like a slow inhalation of the palace itself. The moment for solitude now softens into a broader rhythm, one that includes the silent participation of others. The first sign of this transition is not footsteps or voices, but light. Along the eastern corridor, a chamberlain appears, bearing a candelabrum of tall beeswax candles. He moves with deliberate slowness, as though afraid to disturb the hushed serenity of the air around him. The candles are unlit at first, pale and tapered, their wicks untouched. The candelabrum itself gleams faintly, silver polished to a quiet shine. He pauses just beyond the chamber door, waiting. Another attendant, already inside, opens the heavy panel with the softest creak, timed to coincide with the inhale between footfalls. The light of the hearth flickers as the door opens, as if welcoming the presence of the first of the king's many silent witnesses. Once inside, the chamberlain begins the slow process of illumination. Each candle is touched by a flame transferred carefully from the hearth, a sacred borrowing of fire. The candles bloom to life one by one, their light golden and tremulous, casting flickers on the marble walls and gilded furniture. They do not chase away the shadows, but rather soften them, blurring the line between glow and gloom. The chamber, still cloaked in morning hush, becomes something closer to a chapel than a room. The tall candles, now burning steadily, lend the space a sense of the eternal. Their light is steady, not piercing. It is the kind of illumination that invites contemplation rather than action, as though even the photons respect the pace of the court. Soon others begin to enter. Courtiers, hand-selected by role and protocol, appear at the threshold of the king's private world. They are dressed not in garish splendor, but in carefully curated restraint velvet jackets in subdued tones, lace cuffs pressed smooth, shoes polished but not ostentatious. Their faces are composed, free of expression but rich with awareness. Each one understands the importance of this moment. They step inside not as individuals, but as part of a larger mechanism. Their movements are synchronized by a shared memory of what this hour means. One by one, they take their places along the perimeter of the room, forming a gentle crescent of observation. None dares to speak. Their role is not to converse, but to be present. The light of the candles dances on their polished buttons and gilded buckles. Shadows drift across their features, rendering them almost statuesque. As they settle into stillness, the air thickens with quiet expectancy. No one commands their posture, yet all assume it with instinctive precision. The space breathes around them. The king, now fully robed, remains seated. He does not acknowledge them directly. His gaze remains soft and distant, as though focused on something far beyond the visible room. He is not aloof, but centered, as though he draws gravity into the fabric of the space simply by being still. Another attendant enters, bearing a second candelabrum. This one is taller, its arms more elaborate. The new candles are lit in the same reverent fashion, each one adding its golden thread to the woven fabric of morning. The air now carries the faint scent of beeswax and linen smoke. The warmth of so many small flames gathers in gentle layers. Mirrors along the far wall capture the light and scatter it softly across the chamber. The reflections are not exact, but blurred slightly by the age of the glass. In this way, the light is doubled and dimmed at once, echoing the soft rituals of the space. The courtiers remain motionless. Their presence is not meant to prompt action, but to affirm the unbroken tradition of the king's mourning. Their stillness is as vital as the flames themselves. A ritual is not made only of motion, but of waiting. Occasionally, a servant will adjust the wick of a candle, coaxing it to burn more cleanly. The tiny snick of the tool is almost lost amid the silence, but it adds to the rhythm nonetheless a quiet note in a larger composition. One courtier, older than the others, closes his eyes briefly, not from fatigue, but perhaps in reflection. Around him, the atmosphere is thick with the weight of history, of countless mornings like this one. The wax drips slowly from the candles, marking time more delicately than any clock. It forms translucent pearls at the bases, small monuments to each passing minute. Somewhere beyond the chamber, a door closes, and the sound echoes faintly through the hallways. It does not interrupt the moment, only punctuates it. Here, inside, the pace does not change. The light grows ever so subtly, not with haste, but with inevitability. The sky beyond the tall windows begins to lose its lavender hue, shifting toward pale gold. The king finally rises, not as a signal to the room, but as the natural conclusion of this phase of the day. The courtiers do not react outwardly. Their eyes track him without shifting their heads. He crosses the room slowly, the hem of his robe whispering across the floor. In his wake, the flames continue their silent flickering, unmoved by the change. He pauses near one of the candles, as if to feel its warmth. His hand does not reach for it. He only stands near it, allowing its light to rest gently against his features. In this moment, man and flame mirror one another, steady, composed, timeless. As the king steps toward the adjoining chamber, the courtiers prepare to follow, but they do not rush. They wait for the smallest cue, a nod, a glance, a breath, before moving. Their shoes make no sound against the floor. Their formation holds. And so the ceremony of candles and courtiers concludes, not with a gesture, but with absence. The room, now bathed in flickering light and filled with the scent of wax and linen, slowly empties. Yet it feels no less full. The memory of the ritual lingers in the warmth of the flames, in the lengthening shadows, and in the silence that follows. In Versailles, mourning is not something that happens. It is something that is honored. As the glow of candles lingers in the air, and the subtle weight of tradition continues to settle into every corner of the chamber, the rhythm of the morning unfolds toward one of its most understated yet profound rituals. The king says first nourishment of the day. It is not a grand meal, nor a celebration of flavor. It is a quiet offering, simple, warm, and measured. A servant, chosen for the stillness of his movements and the consistency of his steps, enters with a small silver tray. Upon it rests a porcelain bowl filled with a gently steaming broth. The surface of the liquid shimmers faintly, a translucent amber hue catching the golden light of the nearby candelabra. A silver spoon rests beside the bowl, polished until it resembles still water. A single slice of toasted bread, golden and precise, sits on a linen napkin. The scent that rises from the broth is faint and soothing, an infusion of herbs from the palace garden, hints of parsnip, celery, and a subtle wisp of thyme. There is no heaviness, no excess. The warmth of the food is not to satisfy hunger, but to prepare the body for the day ahead. It is nourishment as affirmation, taken in silence and grace. The king sits, still robed and composed. The servant does not speak as he presents the tray, placing it upon a small table beside the king's chair. The table is low, carved of walnut, its surface inlaid with delicate ivory marquetry. It has stood in this chamber for decades, used for this same purpose every morning. Its familiarity is part of the comfort it provides. Louis XIV, ruler of France, does not devour the meal before him. He observes it, acknowledges it, and raises the spoon in a gesture as quiet as breath. The silver dips gently into the broth, breaking the surface like a leaf touching still water. The spoon is raised slowly, and the liquid taken with equal patience. There is no sound, but the near-silent clink of silver against porcelain. The room does not respond. It continues to hold its breath, honoring the king's private communion with sustenance. This is a moment of solitude within ceremony, a pause between elements as vital as breath between sentences. The toast, when taken, is lifted with care. Its texture, perfectly crisp, breaks with the softest resistance between the fingers. No crumbs fall, no hasty bites are taken. Each motion is calculated but natural, practiced yet sincere. The king eats not as one with appetite, but as one fulfilling a part of a greater ritual. Around him, the chamber remains still. The flames of the candles waver slightly as a draft moves through the tall windows. The light outside has shifted from gold to pale ivory. Day is advancing, but here, inside, time remains wrapped in ritual. Even the breeze respects the boundary of the moment. One courtier, still positioned along the perimeter of the room, lowers his gaze, not from shame, but from reverence. He does not watch the king eat. To do so would be to intrude on the sanctity of the act. This is not a meal for display. It is a restoration, private and unspoken. The servants stand ready, but none move. The only change in the room is the gradual lowering of the broth level in the bowl, the quiet diminishing of heat that rises from its surface. Steam curls upward like breath in the cold, dissipating before it reaches the ceiling. The spoon rests at intervals on the edge of the bowl, never clattering, never hurried. It is in these intervals that thought occurs. Perhaps the king reflects on the day to come, or on the dreams that pass through the hours before dawn. Or perhaps he reflects on nothing at all, allowing his mind to float like the leaves of time suspended in the golden broth. The bowl is not emptied completely. It never is. The meal ends not when there is nothing left, but when enough has been taken. This is a practice of restraint, a deliberate closing of the moment. The spoon is placed gently back on the napkin, parallel to the bowl. The toast, now gone, leaves no trace of its presence. The servant returns to retrieve the tray. He does so with the same grace with which he entered. The tray is lifted smoothly, with no clink or jostle, and carried away like an offering completed. The scent of the broth lingers briefly in the air, mingling with beeswax and lavender. Then, even that vanishes. There is no applause, no acknowledgement. The ritual is not for an audience. It is for rhythm, for grounding, for the quiet nourishment of a king and the kingdom he embodies. The absence of reaction is the clearest sign of its success. The king remains seated for a moment longer. His hands rest lightly on the arms of the chair. His posture is unchanged, but something within him has shifted, a warmth now rooted at the center, subtle and sustaining. He breathes, long and even, and the morning continues. In the adjoining room, preparations for the next part of the day begin. The whisper of fabrics being arranged, the faint chime of a clock being wound, the slow unlocking of a cabinet. All these sounds remain beyond the boundary of the king's attention, for he is still within the space that the broth has carved out, a cocoon of silence, warmth, and soft replenishment. Eventually, the king stands, a movement so fluid and deliberate that it feels inevitable. The chair is left behind without fanfare. The small table is cleared. The porcelain bowl has already been returned to the kitchens, where it will be washed by hand, dried with linen, and prepared for the next morning. The candles continue their soft vigil. The light outside the windows has shifted again, now approaching the full hue of day. Shadows retreat to the corners of the chamber, replaced by a more direct clarity. But the softness remains. The memory of the meal lingers, like a whisper one, continues to hear even after it has passed. A spoon of broth, taken in silence, has marked the passing of the hour, and with it, the king has crossed another threshold in the long, slow ceremony of his day. After the quiet nourishment of broth and bread, the next movement in the king's morning routine unfolds with the same careful cadence that has defined the day thus far. The meal having warmed the body, now yields to an activity meant to engage the mind. And yet, even here, stimulation is gentle, never jarring. There is no flurry of news, no overwhelming flood of paper or parchment. There is only a quiet selection of reading, curated with care, offered with silence. A valet enters with a small wooden tray, more modest than the one used for the meal. Upon it are 3 or 4 neatly folded letters, a thin-bound volume of printed news, and a manuscript, each item carefully chosen by secretaries who know the king's preferences and his aversions. These documents are never urgent. They are not emissaries of unrest, but emissaries of calm knowledge, of connection to the world beyond Versailles without breaching the serenity within. The tray is placed on a nearby escritoire, its surface polished smooth from years of use. The room, still dimly aglow from the tall beeswax candles and morning sun that now filters through gauzy curtains, creates the perfect atmosphere for such a quiet communion. The king, now seated at the desk, does not rush. His movements are methodical. The pace is not of necessity, but of deliberation. The first letter is from the Académie Française, elegantly addressed and sealed with wax. The king lifts it with careful fingers, breaking the seal with a silver knife. The letter opens with a delicate crack of parchment yielding to intent. The script is small, tight, and ornate, inked in sepia tones that show the pen's path across the page like the delicate lines of an engraving. He reads without expression, but not without attention. His eyes move slowly across the lines, absorbing not only the meaning but the tone, the shape of words as much as their content. The correspondence is likely ceremonial, an update on a scholarly debate, a progress report on a historical compilation, but it is welcomed like a familiar friend. The king reads not only to learn, but to inhabit the continuity of things. When the letter is set aside, it is done with quiet reverence, no haste, no folding. It is returned to the tray, as one might replace a cherished volume on a library shelf. The next item is the printed news from a province Bourgogne, perhaps, or Languedoc. The pages are thin and slightly uneven, bound with a thread down the spine. Its tone is modest, even dry, but never careless. Louis turns the pages slowly. The news is local. Harvest reports, trade fluctuations, a note on rainfall. There are no alarms, no exclamations. The king values this steadiness, the pulse of his kingdom beating in quiet time with the land. He reads of vineyards maturing under temperate skies, of river barges making steady progress from port to port. The words paint not drama, but reassurance. A servant nearby adjusts the curtain, allowing slightly more light to fall across the desk. The king shifts subtly in response, his eyes narrowing for focus. Outside, the day is maturing, but inside the chamber, the hour remains cradled in the meditative hush of early light and restrained thought. The manuscript is last. Bound in soft leather, it contains an excerpt from a philosophical treatise being prepared for review. The handwriting is older, more deliberate. It is a draft, perhaps sent by an advisor for royal perusal, perhaps even for patronage. The king does not read it as a scholar would, line by line with annotation, but as one might observe a slow-moving landscape through a carriage window, absorbing it, acknowledging it, letting its contours settle into his awareness. The content may deal with order and beauty, with nature's reflection in governance, or the virtues of restraint in leadership. These are not new ideas, but they are enduring ones. And as the king reads, the quiet turns inward. The chamber becomes less a space and more a mind, a cathedral of thought enclosed by brocade and marble. Occasionally, the king pauses, not out of confusion or distraction, but reflection. The silence around him invites this. He may look up at the ceiling where cherubs are painted in frozen flight, or at the gilded moldings whose patterns echo the symmetry of the palace gardens. There is no noise. The servants do not move. Even the air seems to still itself to match the contemplative cadence of the moment. And when he resumes, the sound of a page turning is like a tide returning. It is gentle, expected, and satisfying. The texture of paper under fingertip, the slight give of the parchment, the whisper of movement, all serve as tactile punctuation in this unfolding soliloquy of thought. Outside, the sun has risen further. The light through the windows is brighter now, but it does not pierce. It falls in soft, angled bands across the room, touching surfaces with gold, but not disrupting their quiet. The flicker of candlelight is no longer necessary, but no one moves to extinguish them. Their glow still matters. Their presence is not to illuminate, but to remind. When the reading concludes, the tray is once again lifted by the valet. Each item returned with the same care it was delivered. The king closes the volume, slides the letters back into their envelope, and rests his hands briefly on the arms of his chair. His fingers tap once, twice, a rhythm not of impatience, but of grounding. There is no announcement, no sudden transition. The hour of reading is simply done. It leaves no residue but calm. In the corner, a clock chimes softly, once. A sound as rounded as a breath. It signals the slow progression of morning. But nothing hurries. There is time still. The room holds its composure. The king rises once again, not rushed, but with the assurance of one who moves within a carefully crafted world. He walks from the desk to the windows, where the gardens of Versailles stretch endlessly outward in patterned silence. And for a moment, he lingers there. Not as ruler, not as host, but as witness. The written word has passed through him. The light has moved. The mind has stirred. And the day, ever slow, ever regal, continues. As the morning continues to unfold with its customary grace, the stillness within the king's chamber begins to resonate outward. Beyond the marbled corridors and golden tapestries, past the polished salons and mirrored galleries, a quiet stir begins in the royal stables of Versailles. Though the king will not yet leave his quarters, preparations beyond his immediate presence continue in silent homage to routine. The royal stables are an architecture of order and elegance, nestled at the edge of the estate like a symphony's low, steady percussion. The walls, of pale stone and gentle archways, open to expansive courtyards where the sun now reaches fully, casting long shadows that stretch like silk ribbons across the ground. The air carries the earthy scent of hay, leather, and warm breath. The horses are already awake. They have been since the earliest hints of dawn. Grooms move among them with practiced calm, tending to manes and coats with soft bristled brushes, working in long, slow strokes. Each animal, chosen for beauty and temperament, stands in solemn patience. There is no need for reins to command them. They are creatures of habit, and they too have memorized the morning's rhythm. A bay stallion receives particular attention today. Its coat gleams like polished wood, deep and rich in color. The groom combs its mane with quiet concentration, and rubs down its legs with a warm cloth. The stallion flicks its tail, not from irritation but acknowledgement. Behind it, a gray moire leans against her stall gate, observing with dark, half-lidded eyes. Saddles are brought out, not yet placed, only inspected. The leather is supple and dark, freshly conditioned the evening before. The buckles shine softly, each fastened by hand and inspected twice. Velvet saddle pads lie folded nearby, their embroidery catching the low morning light. These are not accessories of pageantry. They are the tools of a language spoken in motion, in partnership. In a smaller courtyard adjacent to the stable, a fountain murmurs quietly. Water spills from a lion's mouth into a circular basin, its surface disturbed only by the occasional ripple of wind. Birds perch along its rim, preening, pausing, then lifting off again into the open sky above Versailles. The serenity here is complete. It is not emptiness, but fullness suspended in pause. Inside the stables, the soundscape is soft and rhythmic, hooves shifting on straw, brushes whisking through coats, the creak of leather as bridles are tested. These noises do not intrude upon the morning. They enrich it, layering it with an awareness of life in motion, slow, purposeful, and attentive. Though the king does not ride each morning, the horses are prepared all the same. The act of readiness itself is part of the palace's unspoken pact with continuity. The royal grooms know this well. Their care is not dependent on audience or applause. Their satisfaction is drawn from precision, from the seamless blending of beauty and utility. A stable hand steps into a sunbeam, lifting a brush to examine a few stray hairs. He flicks them away gently, then resumes his task. Another tends to hooves, checking for stones or splinters, then smoothing each with gentle strokes. The horses, in turn, respond with almost human stillness. Their breath curls in the cool air, rising in spirals that catch the light. Near the far end of the stable, an open archway frames the distant garden. From this vantage, the symmetry of the grounds can be seen: gravel paths, clipped hedges, fountains dormant but waiting. The visual harmony reflects the same order present in the grooming of the horses. All things mirror each other in Versailles, even across domains. A white stallion steps forward now, its gait smooth and deliberate. It is led into the light, where its coat seems almost translucent in places. A velvet blanket is draped across its back, more ceremonial than functional, and the effect is instantaneous. Dignity given form. It lifts its head, ears pricked. There is no sound but the breeze. In a small annex near the stables, riding boots are polished, gloves laid out, and riding coats brushed free of lint. Not for today, perhaps, but always prepared. The king may walk instead of ride, may remain within halls of marble and gold, but the readiness of the horses is never questioned. It is a gesture not to him as man, but to the role he inhabits. Back in the main stable, the sun has risen high enough to catch the polished brass fixtures along the stalls. They glow softly, halos of gold appearing along beams and saddle hooks. Dust dances in the air, not in chaos, but in slow suspension. Even the insects here seem to move with care, tracing lines of air as if aware of their role in the composition. Occasionally, a page arrives to report that the king remains in his chambers. The message is always received with a nod, never surprise. The routine does not demand presence. It simply maintains possibility. And so, the horses remain ready. Their tack is arranged neatly. Water troughs are full. Feed is measured. The morning continues as if it were a painting slowly forming. A child's voice, distant and restrained, echoes faintly through a hallway, perhaps a noble son learning his first lessons in horsemanship. But even that sound fades, absorbed by the thick walls and solemn air. What remains is a scene held in balance: animal, handler, structure, and silence. And still, the king has not arrived. But he does not need to. From his chambers, he is aware of the preparations made on his behalf. He knows the routine has been honored, that the stables are alive with quiet care, that the horses are tended to as if he might descend at any moment. This awareness itself is a kind of participation. As the hour stretches toward mid-morning, no tension creeps in. There is no impatience among the grooms, no urgency in the animals. The sun, now higher, filters through the stable windows and lands on the tiled floor in soft pools. A groom hums under his breath, a simple melody, perhaps passed down through generations of handlers. This is not the beginning of something, nor is it the end. It is a movement in a larger composition, one that loops gently each day in variations of light, presence, and readiness. The horses stand beneath wooden beams worn smooth by time. Their eyes are calm, their breath even. Their ears flick once, twice, then still. A final inspection is done. Saddles are returned to their stands, the velvet pads refolded. Brushes are rinsed in a shallow basin and hung to dry in the sun. No fanfare, no final bow, only a return to stillness. Back in the king's quarters, a window is opened. A faint breeze carries with it the scent of hay and the distant rhythm of hooves. The king inhales once, slowly, and continues with the next step of his morning. He does not look outward. He does not speak. But he knows. The royal horses are ready. After his contemplative walk through the long, resonant corridors, the king reaches a chamber that feels distinct in its stillness, a space preserved in both reverence and dust. The gallery of paintings lies before him, not bustling with spectators or courtiers, but lying open in quiet testimony to lives, stories, and brushstrokes suspended in time. This is a sanctuary for both the eyes and the spirit, a domain of memory rendered in oil, canvas, and silence. The gallery is long, high-ceilinged, and subtly lit. The windows here are few, permitting only filtered shafts of daylight to enter. The air carries a faint musk of oil paint, of seasoned wood, of quiet time. Even the sunlight here seems cautious, stepping lightly across the floors so as not to disturb what has long since settled. Dust motes drift lazily, suspended in golden beams, circling slowly like thoughts. The walls are thick with paintings, portraits, landscapes, mythological and sacred scenes. Each gilded frame forms a window into another moment, serene or stirring, yet none clamoring for attention. The king pauses before them in turn, not to judge, but to reacquaint himself with these quiet witnesses of the past. Each holds its place with dignity, and the silence around them is not emptiness, but reverence. A portrait of a naval commander stands tall, the backdrop stormed by seas in turmoil. The colors have deepened over time, giving the piece a gravity it may not have originally held, as though sea, wind, and salt had penetrated the canvas. Elsewhere, a rural harvest unfolds peasants bundling wheat beneath a soft golden sky. Their movements are slow, cyclical, mirroring the rhythm of seasons. The light within the painting is warm and familiar, like the memory of sunlight on one's skin. The king's hands remain loosely clasped behind him, fingers twitching now and then as he studies the paint's texture. He does not reach out, but he senses the ridges, the raised swells of pigment where a brush once lingered. Some paintings are polished and dusted daily. Others, higher or more discreet, carry a fine veil of dust. It is not neglect, but reverence, a gauze of time that softens, preserves, and cushions the past in a gentle silence. As he walks further, the gallery's mood shifts. Themes grow contemplative. The divine appears angels painted in half-light, saints resting in thought. These are not ecstatic portrayals, but inward, quiet. Their eyes do not engage. They dream within their frames. The palette is more restrained cool blues, aged golds, and softened earth tones. The room does not interpret. It invites one to dwell, to listen inwardly. In a quiet alcove hangs a smaller piece, a candle on a stone sill, its flame gently rendered. The surrounding space is dark, the candle alone aglow. It's simple, almost stark. Yet the execution is so deliberate that one might feel the warmth or smell faint tallow. The king lingers. The image offers no grandeur, just a whisper of light, and it is enough. It is a meditation in paint, a moment stilled in breath. The wooden floor beneath him is worn smooth by generations of footfalls, yet it absorbs rather than echoes his steps. The king notices small imperfections, a frame slightly crooked, a crack in the varnish, a thread pulled from a nearby wall tapestry. These do not offend him, they assure him. They are proof of time lived, of care applied slowly, and of continuity. They are part of the gallery's heartbeat, subtle and persistent. Benches line the perimeter, simple, hand-carved, polished by time and touch. Few sit here, but they remain, awaiting the contemplative. The king does not sit, but acknowledges their quiet invitation. Later, perhaps, a painter or visiting noble might come to linger. But now, the space is his in silence. It is a silence that does not demand, but welcomes. He stops again before a triptych. The Annunciation unfolds across the 3 panels. An angel leans with quiet poise toward the Virgin, wings folded with grace, a hand extended not in drama but in tenderness. Her face holds a blend of sorrow and understanding. The folds of her robe curve like softened lines of thought. The king lets his gaze rest there, feeling not observed but accompanied, as though the painting breathes beside him. A faint breeze stirs through a window high above, shifting the air gently. Dust dances again. A few leaves, wind-blown from the gardens, rest along a sill, still and listening. Somewhere, a bird trills softly, once, and is gone. The heavy curtains and thick oil paint absorb the sound, keeping the room hushed, as if the gallery itself were holding its breath. Retracing his steps, he pauses before a final painting near the entry, a view of Versailles from decades earlier. The gardens are less precise, the palace more intimate. Trees are young, pathways undefined, but the symmetry is already present. He observes not as a king, but as a witness to change, to design, to the palace becoming what it now is. Memory and movement rest together in the frame. It is a moment of personal archaeology, tender and reflective. As he stands there, the light shifts minutely. The rising sun has moved, just enough to catch a gilt corner of the frame, sending a narrow gleam across the painting's surface. It is a small moment, almost invisible, but he sees it. And in that gleam, something stirs, not revelation, but affirmation. A quiet recognition passed between past and present. The king exhales slowly, the sound absorbed by the space. The gallery has revealed no great mystery, no shock of revelation, but it has offered present stillness, patience, and the reminder that beauty need not shout to be remembered. When tended with care, beauty becomes a kind of order, a reflection not of the world outside, but of one's interior rhythm, one's truest self reflected quietly back. He steps into the corridor again, leaving the paintings behind. But they remain with him. His fragrance clings even after the bloom is left behind. Not one single face or scene occupies his thoughts, but all of them together as a quiet harmony of memory. They were not just seen, they were visited. And in that visitation, the morning feels more whole completed, not by grandeur, but by grace. After his contemplative walk through the long, resonant corridors, the king reaches a chamber that feels distinct in its stillness, a space preserved in both reverence and dust. The gallery of paintings lies before him, not bustling with spectators or courtiers, but lying open in quiet testimony to lives, stories, and brushstrokes suspended in time. This is a sanctuary for both the eyes and the spirit, a domain of memory rendered in oil, canvas, and silence. The gallery is long, high-ceilinged, and subtly lit. The windows here are few, permitting only filtered shafts of daylight to enter. The air carries a faint musk of oil paint, of seasoned wood, of quiet time. Even the sunlight here seems cautious, stepping lightly across the floors so as not to disturb what has long since settled. Dust motes drift lazily, suspended in golden beams, circling slowly like thoughts. The walls are thick with paintings, portraits, landscapes, mythological, and sacred scenes. Each gilded frame forms a window into another moment, serene or stirring, yet none clamoring for attention. The king pauses before them in turn, not to judge, but to reacquaint himself with these quiet witnesses of the past. Each holds its place with dignity, and the silence around them is not emptiness, but reverence. A portrait of a naval commander stands tall, the backdrop stormed by seas in turmoil. The colors have deepened over time, giving the piece a gravity it may not have originally held, as though sea wind and salt had penetrated the canvas. Elsewhere, a rural harvest unfolds peasants bundling wheat beneath a soft golden sky. Their movements are slow, cyclical, mirroring the rhythm of seasons. The light within the painting is warm and familiar, like the memory of sunlight on one's skin. The king's hands remain loosely clasped behind him, fingers twitching now and then as he studies the paint's texture. He does not reach out, but he senses the ridges, the raised swells of pigment where a brush once lingered. Some paintings are polished and dusted daily. Others, higher or more discreet, carry a fine veil of dust. It is not neglect, but reverence, a gauze of time that softens, preserves, and cushions the past in a gentle silence. As he walks further, the gallery's mood shifts. Themes grow contemplative. The divine appears, angels painted in half-light, saints resting in thought. These are not ecstatic portrayals, but inward, quiet. Their eyes do not engage. They dream within their frames. The palette is more restrained, cool blues, aged golds, and softened earth tones. The room does not interpret. It invites one to dwell. In a quiet alcove hangs a smaller piece, a candle on a stone sill, its flame gently rendered. The surrounding space is dark, the candle alone aglow. It's simple, almost stark. Yet the execution is so deliberate that one might feel the warmth or smell faint tallow. The king lingers. The image offers no grandeur, just a whisper of light, and it is enough. It is a meditation in paint. The wooden floor beneath him is worn smooth by generations of footfalls, yet it absorbs rather than echoes his steps. The king notices small imperfections, a frame slightly crooked, a crack in the varnish, a thread pulled from a nearby wall tapestry. These do not offend him. They assure him. They are proof of time lived, of care applied slowly, and of continuity. They are part of the gallery's heartbeat. Benches line the perimeter, simple, hand-carved, polished by time and touch. Few sit here, but they remain, awaiting the contemplative. The king does not sit, but acknowledges their quiet invitation. Later, perhaps, a painter or visiting noble might come to linger. But now, the space is his in silence. He stops again before a triptych. The Annunciation unfolds across the 3 panels. An angel leans with quiet poise toward the Virgin, wings folded with grace, a hand extended not in drama, but in tenderness. Her face holds a blend of sorrow and understanding. The folds of her robe curve like softened lines of thought. The king lets his gaze rest there, feeling not observed, but accompanied. A faint breeze stirs through a window high above, shifting the air gently. Dust dances again. A few leaves, wind-blown from the gardens, rest along a sill, still and listening. Somewhere, a bird trills softly, once, and is gone. The heavy curtains and thick oil paint absorb the sound, keeping the room hushed, as if the gallery itself were holding its breath. Retracing his steps, he pauses before a final painting near the entry, a view of Versailles from decades earlier. The gardens are less precise, the palace more intimate. Trees are young, pathways undefined, but the symmetry is already present. He observes not as a king, but as a witness, to change, to design, to the palace becoming what it now is. Memory and movement rest together in the frame. It is a moment of personal archaeology. As he stands there, the light shifts minutely. The rising sun has moved, just enough to catch a gilt corner of the frame, sending a narrow gleam across the painting's surface. It is a small moment, almost invisible, but he sees it. And in that gleam, something stirs, not revelation, but affirmation. The king exhales slowly, the sound absorbed by the space. The gallery has revealed no great mystery, no shock of revelation, but it has offered present stillness, patience, and the reminder that beauty need not shout to be remembered. When tended with care, beauty becomes a kind of order, a reflection not of the world outside, but of one's interior rhythm, one's truest self reflected quietly back. He steps into the corridor again, leaving the paintings behind, but they remain with him, as fragrance clings even after the bloom is left behind. Not one single face or scene occupies his thoughts, but all of them together as a quiet harmony of memory. They were not just seen, they were visited. And in that visitation, the morning feels more whole completed, not by grandeur, but by grace. From the hushed embrace of the palace interior, Louis XIV moves toward the gardens, an external extension of the same symmetry and stillness. If the halls of Versailles are poems in stone, the gardens are their mirror written in hedges, gravel, and bloom. The moment his feet touch the stone threshold that separates the colonnade from the vast grounds, the air shifts, cooler, lighter, tinged with the scent of green. The gardens spread before him in a vast, geometric tapestry. The formal French style reigns here, not merely for beauty, but as an expression of control over nature. Each hedge is trimmed with mathematical precision. The paths radiate outward like spokes from a celestial wheel. Nothing is left to chance. The eye, like the foot, is guided, soothed by repetition and rhythm. The king does not stride quickly through this domain. He glides, as if carried by the alignment of lines and angles. On either side of him, boxwood hedges form low labyrinths, their surfaces glossy from the morning's dew. Intersecting paths lead to fountains, statues, and hidden alcoves. But Louis remains on the central promenade, absorbing the entirety rather than seeking the parts. Gravel crunches softly beneath his shoes. It is a deliberate sound, neither intrusive nor forgotten. It marks his presence in a space designed to absorb him completely. The gravel, imported and raked daily, offers gentle resistance with each step, reminding the walker of his pace. To his right, rows of orange trees sit in symmetrical boxes. Their glossy leaves tremble faintly in the breeze. Some bear fruit, small and golden, while others hold blossoms white and star-shaped, emitting a perfume so subtle it feels like a memory. Gardeners pass silently in the distance, adjusting branches, gathering fallen leaves. They do not intrude upon the king's passage. They tend to the background, ensuring the stage remains pristine. The light here is different than in the corridors. It is wide and undisturbed, stretching across the open expanse with slow certainty. The sun has risen just high enough to lend warmth without glare. Statues of nymphs, muses, and gods cast long shadows across the lawns. The king passes them like old acquaintances, pausing now and then not to admire, but to witness. To walk these gardens is not to explore it, is to attune. Every element responds to the whole. The balance of grass to gravel, of shade to light, of growth to formal, speak in silence. The rustle of clipped hornbeam leaves, the soft cooing of a pigeon perched along the balustrade, the creak of an iron gate in the distance, these are the voices of Versailles. When words have no place. Further ahead lies a parterre patterned arrangement of plant beds, bordered in tight hedges, and filled with colored gravel and seasonal flowers. From above, it would resemble embroidery. From the ground, it is a scroll unfurled in earth and bloom. Louis pauses before it, hands behind his back. His gaze does not flicker. It absorbs. Nearby, a breeze stirs a bed of lavender. They're violet. Stalks sway gently, each movement catching the light like thread pulled through a loom. The scent rises fresh, herbal, dry, and blends with the citrus of the oranges and the distant sweetness of climbing roses. The air is dense with fragrance, yet none overwhelms. It is a harmony. Louis continues, his steps falling into the cadence of the garden itself. At set intervals, stone benches offer pause, though he does not take them. His movement, steady and slow, is pause enough. Above him, doves circle, their wings slicing the air with a softness that feels almost like fabric. They alight on high, branches or balustrades, cooing as if in conversation with the morning. Water, though unseen at first, begins to speak faintly ahead. A fountain lies in wait still for now, but its presence murmurs through the sound of dripping and the dark glisten of wet stone. Its silence, too, is part of the morning's design. that each element of the garden seems to know its place in time. Tulips. Now gone, gave way to peonies. Roses have begun to unfurl. Even the moss upon the statues is seasonally appropriate, left to grow only where it enhances texture. This is not a garden of spontaneity, but of deep patience. The king stops once more, at the edge of a reflecting pool. Its surface is still, unbroken, holding the sky like a mirror. Clouds drift overhead, their shapes lengthened in the water, giving the illusion of slow movement below. He does not look into the water for himself. Reflection here is not of the face, but of presence dot around the pool, swan's rest. One glides silently across the surface, leaving a perfect wake that ripples outward, bending the sky's image just slightly. Louis watches, not with fascination, but with knowing. These creatures belong here. As he does dot behind him, the palace gleams softly in the new light. Its windows catch the sun and scatter it, sending beams onto the gravel like stars fallen into earth. He does not turn to look. He feels it there, massive and quiet, like a thought too familiar to require attention. The geometry of the garden is not rigidity, it is clarity. It allows the king to move without deciding, to see without searching. In this vast symmetry, he is not confined, but released. The burden of choice dissolves into alignment. He continues onward, the horizon of hedges and lawns stretching before him, time unfolding not in hours, but in footsteps. As the king drifts from the precise geometry of the garden parterres, he approaches a quieter realm of the grounds, where water rests in still anticipation, not yet called to life. Here lie the fountains, arranged in graceful configurations, scattered throughout groves and open expanses like sleeping musicians in a grand orchestra. They wait, silent and serene, for the hour when they will awaken and play. The morning air is cooler here, wrapped in the hush of shaded paths and quiet. Stone. The fountains remain inactive by royal design, preserving their motion and sound for select hours. This stillness, however, is not emptiness. It is potential. It hums softly beneath the surface like breath beneath a dream. The king walks among them, not as a conductor of performance, but as a silent observer before the overture begins. The fountain of Apollo lies to one side, its bronze horses frozen mid-leap, their hooves raised in defiance of motion. The chariot they pull, drawn skyward by sculpted momentum, casts long shadows across the dewy ground. The king regards it as he might regard a painting studying its form, its weight in space, its dialogue with time. Moss has begun to edge the stone basins, not aggressively, but like an embroidery of age. The surfaces are cool and damp to the touch. The scent of wet stone mingles with the green aroma of shaded grass, and in some corners the faint mineral tang of still water. Birds occasionally dip to the water's surface, sending quiet ripples that vanish without consequence. A narrow path curves toward a smaller fountain, nestled in a grove, a circular basin flanked by satyrs and woodland nymphs. The figures recline, in sculptural ease, their expressions caught in eternal mirth. One might imagine the water that will later spring from their mouths and hands, but for now, all is held in pause. The pipes lie dormant. The valves remain closed. The king traces their outlines with his eyes, not needing movement to perceive life. In these gardens, water is not only function, but spectacle. But it is also stillness, the suggestion of future joy. The hydraulic systems beneath the earth complex, an ingenious weight, like organs under a cathedral, ready to sing. Yet in the quiet of the morning they sleep, and the king walks as though among dreams not yet spoken. Here and there, droplets have formed along the stone rims, leftovers from dew or last evening's mist. They shimmer, catching bits of light, tiny mirrors to the sky. The king pauses at a large pool where a single water lily floats. It is not native, but it has been permitted, a gentle exception within the rules of formality. Its round leaves offer balance to the strict lines of stone, its bloom half closed as if still waking. A gardener, distant and silent, passes with a rake slung over his shoulder. He moves carefully so as not to disturb the delicate raked gravel. Surrounding the larger pools, the king sees him, but does not acknowledge him aloud. The gardener knows his place in the harmony of this moment. Presence is enough. At the mirror fountain, so named for its still surface, the king halts. The reflection is perfect. Trees, sky, himself rendered upside down and utterly still. The illusion is so complete that he feels as though he could step into it, vanish into its cool silence. The breeze has died entirely now. Even the leaves remain motionless, holding their breath with the water. He recalls how this very space, later in the day, will erupt with fanfare jets of water surging. Into the sky, synchronized arcs glittering in the sunlight. Children of the court will run between sprays. Nobles will stroll past with folded hands. Music will rise, laughter will echo. But not yet. This quiet is its own spectacle. He moves again, following a shaded colonnade that borders another set. Oh, fountains! Stone cherubs ride dolphins here, and sea creatures spiral into elegant notes. The Baroque imagination rendered in marble, playful and precise. Some fountains have leaves settled in their bowls. Others hold small puddles where frogs hide beneath stone edges. Water has always held the power to calm and to command. At Versailles, it does both, depending on the hour. This hour is one of reverence. The king recognizes that stillness is not a lack but a preparation, an honoring of pause. The fountains understand this. Their silence is not void but potential. It gathers beneath the ground, in dark, echoing chambers of pipe and stone, waiting for the sun to climb. Another pool glistens faintly, fed only by condensation. A single dragonfly darts across it, the only motion in the scene. Its wings flicker, briefly, then vanish into shadow. The king's eyes follow it, not with intent, but with awareness absorbing the way it moved, the brief sound of its flight. There is a balance here between human control and natural rhythm. The engineers who designed the fountains carved channels through which water may dance, but they cannot dictate its essence. Water always retains its mystery. Even as it obeys, it remembers its origin cloud, rain, stream. The king, too, remembers. These fountains, elaborate and staged, still owe something to the wild Dot. He walks among them a while longer, each step accompanied by the imagined splash that is yet to come. But he does not summon them. He listens to their silence, and in doing so, he understands the shape of the day. Eventually, he pauses near a final fountain, a grand cascade, tiered and triumphant. It descends like a frozen waterfall, empty now, but echoing with the memory of its full voice. The king rests a hand briefly upon the cool marble rail. There is condensation, smooth as glass, and beneath it the faint warmth of stone gathering sun. The birds have quieted. The air has warmed, and in the distance, a bell tolls softly, signaling the progression of time. Yet within this watery enclave, nothing rushes. All remains prepared. The fountains will rise later, but not now. Now is the time of hush. He turns away, his shadow long against the stone path. The fountains behind him remain as they were waiting, listening, dreaming of motion. And in that dream, the palace breathes. After the contemplative silence of the gardens and the gentle reverie of the fountains, the king returns slowly to the inner sanctum of the palace. The path takes him through sun-dappled walkways and beneath stone archways that echo faintly with his measured steps. Though the day has only just unfolded, the rituals already performed have painted the morning with a brush of serenity and ceremonial grace. Now, A quiet indulgence awaits a cup of warm chocolate. This is no hasty refreshment, no hurried sip between affairs of state. It is, instead, a ceremony of its own. The beverage, a novelty from the New World, is prized not merely for its taste, but for the warmth and comfort it offers. A pause in the structure of the morning that both honors and elevates repose. In the king's private breakfast room, tall windows frame the light like panels of a painting. The chamber is small by Versailles standards, but still adorned with intricate wall panels, tapestries depicting pastoral scenes, and gilded moldings that shimmer as the sun slowly climbs. A table of polished walnut stands near the hearth, set with porcelain from the finest workshops in Limoges. A servant enters silently, bearing a silver tray. On it rests a slender pot of dark chocolate, steaming softly, its rich aroma drifting into the room with a slow, calming insistence. A delicate porcelain cup, its handle painted with gold, sits beside a matching saucer. A small dish of sugar cubes accompanies it, though Louis seldom sweetens the drink. He prefers the depth and quiet strength of the cacao in its truer form. The chocolate is thick, prepared with care by the royal kitchen, a blend of ground cocoa beans, milk warmed to the perfect temperature, and just a trace of spice, cinnamon, and a whisper of vanilla. The liquid, velvety and dark, is poured with careful precision. The sound of it filling the cup is like a low murmur. Soft as the voice of a stream through moss. The king lifts the cup, cradling it in both hands. The porcelain is warm to the touch, its curve fitting gently against his fingers. The scent rises, wrapping around him in a cocoon of comfort. It is the scent of quiet power, of morning contemplation, of centuries preserved in flavor and ritual. He takes the first sip slowly. The warmth spreads immediately, from tongue to throat to chest, a icy, silent bloom of heat that eases its way through the body. The taste is deep and resonant, bitter with a sweetness that emerges only in the final notes, like a last brushstroke on a canvas. It is not a drink to be hurried. Each mouthful is savored, as one might savor music or perfume. Through the tall windows, the sound of the gardens remains, muted now by distance and glass. A dove coos faintly, a branch stirs in the wind. Within the room, the stillness holds. The cup returns to its saucer with the softest click, and the king breathes in once more, as though to inhale the morning's rhythm with the last curl of steam. This moment, this pause, is where the soul of the day resides. For all his power and ceremony, Louis finds in these few sips a solitude that no audience can offer. There is no grandeur in the motion, only grounding. The chocolate is not merely nourishment, but presence, a return to self, a gentle reminder that beneath robe and crown and chamber and gold, there is breath and body and being. Servants enter, briefly to adjust the fire and lay out the next layer of garments for the day's formal progression. Their movements are precise and near-silent, practiced over years of ritual. They do not interrupt. The king, cup in hand, is part of the rhythm, not above it. He finishes the drink slowly, allowing the heat to linger. The empty cup is returned to the tray with quiet finality. A napkin is dabbed at the corners of the mouth, the gesture practiced and restrained. Nothing remains of the chocolate but its echo, a warmth in the chest, a quiet in the mind, a hint of spice on the breath. Ritual, though simple, is deeply embedded in the architecture of his mornings. Like the linen towels or the path through the gardens, it is an element of continuity. The world may shift beyond the palace walls, but this moment endures. A tether, a still point. The king rises without urgency. His chair creaks faintly, the only sound in a room suspended between actions. The servants step forward not to rush him, but to accompany the next transition in the morning's unfolding. A robe is offered. The room is adjusted. Light changes. The fire is tended, yet that cup, that small, delicate vessel, holds more than just a drink. It holds the essence of morning. The idea that even a monarch must pause, must inhale, must cradle warmth. That before the decrees and councils and pageantry, there is this quiet communion with a drink that carries across oceans and centuries. As he moves to depart, a final glance is cast toward the tray, now cleared. It is not regret nor nostalgia, but a quiet nod to what is past, a bow to simplicity. The door opens. Footsteps echo softly down the corridor, but the warmth of chocolate lingers, unseen and unspoken, like a thread running through the silk of the day. As the morning matures and light takes on a more golden hue, King Louis XIV approaches one of the most iconic and majestic spaces within the Palace of Versailles, the Hall of Mirrors. Known not only for its architectural brilliance, but for its symbolic gravity, this space, the Galerie des Glaces, stands as a monument to absolutism and grace. Yet at this hour, before the grandeur of court rituals unfolds, it remains hushed, a sanctum of polished silence. The air in the corridor is cool and softly fragrant, laced with the scent of beeswax and old wood. The king's footsteps echo lightly on the inlaid marble floor as he enters. Each step reverberates between walls lined with reflective grandeur glass and gilt, returning his measured approach with equal composure. 17 great arched windows to his right invite the day's filtered sunlight, while opposite them 17 towering mirrors gaze back with perfect symmetry. This corridor of light and reflection is often filled with dignitaries, music, and murmur, but for now it breathes only stillness. Morning sun angles in through the tall windows in golden beams, catching the bevels of the crystal chandeliers. Dozens of them, suspended like frozen cascades from the ornately painted ceiling, scatter diffusions of pearlescent light across the floor. These scattered gleams of gold, ivory, and pale blue shift slowly with the clouds beyond the glass. The mirrors reflect not the usual pageantry of court life, but the solitary figure of the king, walking in silence, his image endlessly replicated in shimmering forms. He walks slowly, deliberately, not out of age or fatigue, but in deference to the space. The hall does not require pageantry from him. It supplies it. With every step, the mirrors present his image anew, robed in regal silk, composed, contemplative. The faint rustle of embroidered fabric, the hush of leather saws against marble, these become the only music in the air. There is something both reverent and rhythmic in the quiet procession. Each mirror, framed in elaborate golden motifs of acanthus leaves and mythic figures, is not merely reflective. It preserves a sense of time. Triumphs, treaties, ceremonies, all linger here like soft whispers etched into the silvered glass. But today, the mirrors hold a different story, one not of events, but of presence. They cradle the moment, the king's. Pace slows near the middle of the hall, where a single table stands beneath one of the grand chandeliers. Its surface, polished to a mirror-like gleam, reflects the ceiling above with elegant precision. At its center rests a small porcelain vase holding white lily, their fragrance subtle and steady, delicate, yet perceptible. The flowers, freshly gathered from the royal gardens, appear untouched by time, their pale petals luminous against the dark wood. Louis XIV places his hand lightly on the table's edge. The surface is cool, almost like stone, and grounded. The gesture is not ceremonial, but contemplative. Here, he does not reign, he exists. Surrounded by reflections and memory, he allows himself a moment of pause, of stillness. It is not an activity, but presence distilled to its essence. Above him, the ceiling stretches in a visual aria of painted allegory. Gods and virtues sweep. Across the vault in scenes of Louis military victories and celestial triumphs. Their expressions are serene, their gestures grand yet composed. They look not down in judgment, but in quiet witness, as if acknowledging the rhythm of the morning. He turns toward one of the tall windows and gazes through it. From this height, the gardens beyond stretch into elegant geometry alleys of lime. Trees, boxwood hedges clipped into scrollwork, gravel paths that unfurl like ribbons. A distant fountain glints in the sunlight. Birds, hidden among the foliage, chirp faintly, their song light as lace. Through the reflection in the nearest mirror, this exterior world folds inward, as if the hall contains both palace and garden. Turning back into the space, he notices the way sunbeams glide across the floor and onto the walls, their motion dictated by the movement of clouds far above. The mirrors catch the light and bend it, elongating and softening its contours. The hall becomes not just an architectural marvel, but a prism of color, memory, and time. Here, the minutes stretch like silk dot as he walks again, his fingers graze the gilded balustrade beneath the mirrors. The contrast between the warmth of his palm and the cool gilded bronze is striking, grounding him further in this moment. Each mirror he passes presents a subtly altered version of the scene, shaped by the angle of the sun, the texture of his motion, the depth of his breath. This is not repetition, but resonance, a rhythm of reflection. A subtle draft stirs the chandeliers. Their crystals tremble softly, clinking in tones like faraway bells, each note light and unhurried. The air carries the coolness of marble and the faint trace of lavender wax, polished onto every surface. The sound is not intrusive, but tender a reminder that even silence contains layers of sound. If one listens with care, a lone servant appears at the far end of the hall, careful and precise. Without a word, he draws back a heavy curtain by a measured fraction, letting in a greater volume of light. The action is seamless, unnoticed almost, yet it alters the character of the space. The mirrors bloom anew with shifting gold. The king does not turn to acknowledge it. There is no need. The gesture belongs to the natural script of the room. Standing now at the heart of the hall, the king is framed by layers of reflection and radiance. The solitude that enfolds him is not empty, it is filled with meaning. Here, in this corridor of mirrored elegance, he is not simply sovereign. He is stillness personified. The hall becomes less a room than a vessel holding breath, holding time. Eventually, he resumes his walk, slow and steady, toward the double doors at the far end. They remain closed, symbolic of the day still in waiting. As he moves, his many reflections move with him, not behind, but beside and beyond. They glide like petals in a ripple of light, layered and luminous, each one a silent witness. And then, as he reaches the threshold, he pauses briefly, allowing one final glance down the mirrored corridor. The chandeliers sway, the light shifts. The lili remain fragrant, and the mirrors cradle the memory of this quiet procession. Gently, he exits the hall, leaving behind only the soft echo of footsteps and the trailing shimmer of morning light. After the luminous stillness of the Hall of Mirrors, King Louis steps into a world just as silent, but imbued with nature's quieter language. The doors open to a modest side corridor, and from there, a slow path leads toward a terrace overlooking the outer courtyard. Morning continues, serene and unhurried, diffused with soft light that dapples through the stone. Arches above, the courtyard beyond is framed by long galleries and balustrades, covered in pale lichen and worn with time. Marble statues stand like ancient watchers, each frozen in gestures of myth and triumph. But in this tranquil hour, their gaze seems softened, not imperial but contemplative. The air here is cooler, stirred by a faint breeze that carries the scent of dew-damp earth and moss-covered stone. From somewhere unseen comes the sound of feathers shifting. Then a flutter soft, hollow, and round breaks the quiet. A dove has taken flight. Its wings trace a gentle arc across the morning sky, circling. Once before alighting on the balustrade, more doves begin to appear, as if drawn by the hush. They settle in small groups along ledges and atop fountains, their feathers a pale gray touched by lavender. The king watches them for a moment, his presence still and observant. These birds are not here for ceremony. They come because they have. Always come, long before the court arrived and long after it departs. There is a kind of wisdom in their habits, a timeless rhythm. Their presence is not decoration, but continuation, a link to the place itself, not the people who briefly occupy it. Even the king, sovereign of all he surveys, is humbled slightly in their company. Their movements are unbothered by hierarchy. In the center of the courtyard, a fountain lies still. Its basin collects a thin film of rainwater from the night before, shimmering now in patches where light touches it. One dove dips a beak into the surface, the ripple it makes spreading out in perfect circles, one after another, as if marking time. Beyond the doves, further along the walk, the sounds of other birds join in chorus. Sparrows, soft and rhythmic. A crow, distant and low. The natural music rises and falls like breath, carried on the breeze, never intrusive. It complements the rhythm of the palace, rather than disrupting it. Here, the king walks slowly along the terrace, pausing now and then to watch the birds or lean lightly on the stone railing. His fingers trace the cool, weathered surface, feeling the age of it. The marble, worn smooth, bears the subtle patina of centuries, a record not kept in ink, but in the slow polish of wind and touch. In the distance, a pair of peacocks roam, their long tails trailing behind them like silken tapestries. They move without urgency, stepping over fallen petals and across the uneven flagstones. Their colors remain subdued in this morning light, glinting only faintly when they cross a sunbeam. The king notices them, but does not summon them. They are not performers this morning. They are companions in solitude, participating silently in the unfolding of the day. Closer to the walls, ivy climbs along the edges of the masonry, its leaves trembling slightly in the breeze. A gardener, far below, moves slowly along the periphery, tending to planters with practiced calm. Even from a distance, the rhythm of his motions mirrors the pace of the morning, measured, reverent. Back above, a dove flutters from the railing and glides in a slow arc before vanishing behind a pillar. Another takes its place. The king watches, not with amusement, but with presence. The birds are part of Versailles, not in design, but in spirit. They follow no protocol, and yet they belong. The sun has risen higher now, its light gathering warmth. Reflections bounce off nearby windows, flickering briefly across the stone like glimmers on water. The courtyard is still quiet, but alive with subtle motion. Every corner breathes with life, though none of it clamors for notice. The king resumes his walk, his steps soft along the terrace stones. A few leaves drift down from above, carried lazily by the breeze. They spiral through the air before settling quietly near his feet. The act seems choreographed by chance, but feels intentional, an echo of the morning's quiet ballet. From a perch above, a dove coos, its voice deep and hollow. The sound echoes faintly through the colonnade, not loud enough to disturb, but enough to remind all that stillness is not the absence of life, but its gentlest expression. The scent of the morning has shifted. Now there's a touch of citrus, perhaps from the nearby orangery, and a faint trace of damp stone warmed by sun. The air is clean, light, and quietly fragrant. Every breath the king takes is filled with this quiet abundance. He pauses once more. At the far end of the terrace, turning slightly to view the courtyard in its entirety, the doves remain scattered like small notes in a larger symphony. The wind brushes lightly through the trees, and in the distance, a fountain finally begins to stir its first trickle of water, catching the light like a sliver of silver thread. Still, there is no urgency. The day continues its careful unfolding, each element taking its turn. The king stands motionless, his gaze steady, his mind quiet. The world does not press upon him here. Instead, it welcomes him into its still rhythm, its slow breath dot in this moment. It is not the crown that defines him, nor the chamberlains awaiting inside. It is his attention, his willingness to observe without commanding, to be present without shaping. The doves move again, lifting in slow spirals, their wings barely rustling. One passes close, casting a brief shadow across his shoulder. He does not move. The moment passes, and with it, the morning leans gently toward midday, without announcement or fanfare, as softly and surely as the flight of birds. As the sun continues its quiet climb, the light in Versailles begins to shift once more. The air is warmer now, soft and golden, laying gentle hands upon the stone walls and silk-hung corridors. Time moves differently, here not forward in strict cadence, but in drifting eddies, as though each moment folds gently into the next dot within the palace. Movement slows further. The earlier rituals of waking and preparation have concluded, and yet the day does not press forward. Instead, it hovers in a state of contemplative pause. The world within Versailles enters a kind of suspension, neither morning nor quite yet afternoon, but a space between. King Louis XIV retreats inward once again, not to his private chambers, but to a quieter alcove within the eastern wing, a room rarely mentioned, meant not for ceremony, but for stillness. Here there are no courtiers, no attendants, only the filtered light of late morning casting soft arcs across the floor. This room, paneled in pale wood and lined with velvet drapes, has the intimacy of a study, though no papers are scattered, and no books are read. It is a place for thought, not discourse, a space to allow silence to gather and be heard. A simple chair sits by the window, and the king takes it without flourish. Outside the tall panes, the gardens appear distant and still, their geometries softened by the haze of warming air. The clipped box hedges and gravel paths stretch toward the horizon in careful symmetry, but viewed from here, they feel more like memories than designs. The king's gaze lingers, but does not fixate. His hands rest on the carved arms of the chair, fingers relaxed, not poised to command but to feel the texture of the wood beneath his skin. The stillness here is not vacant, it is full of breath, of light, of time unmeasured. Dust motes drift lazily in the golden beams, tiny constellations forming and dissolving in silence. Beyond the window, a sundial sits in the shadow of a chestnut tree. Its face is partially obscured by the angle of the light, its markings faint beneath the climbing ivy. Time is measured here, not in precision, but in essence. The hours unfold like petals, slowly, delicately, without declaration. The king closes his eyes for a moment, not to sleep, but to listen more deeply, to hear the distant rhythm of Versailles breathing, a faint creak of timber, a footstep on marble, the rustle of leaves through open casements. These sounds are not interruptions, but the language of stillness. They rise and fall with the quiet rhythm of the palace. The room remains unchanged. There is no need for motion. The fire in the small hearth has gone out, leaving a scent of soft ash. The tapestry on the far wall stirs imperceptibly in a draught that cannot be seen. And yet the king remains aware, not vigilant, but open. Here, time is not lost, it is absorbed. Each minute deepens the silence, presses more gently into the space. This pause is not empty of action, but ripe with presence. The king is not apart from his duties. He is within them, resting in the hollow between exertion and expectation. A servant enters quietly, unseen at first, only the barest sound of the door announcing his presence. He does not speak. He places a small lidded vessel on a nearby table, a porcelain container filled with lemon balm and warm milk. Then he withdraws. The king reaches for it, cradling it in his hands. The warmth seeps into his skin. He drinks slowly, letting the quiet taste of the herbs rest on his tongue. The steam curls upward, mingling with the beams of light. It carries with it a comfort, beyond flavor something ancestral, familiar. He does not hurry the act. Each sip is a breath, each breath a settling of spirit. The room now feels almost outside of time, as though it exists in a separate layer of the day. The sounds from the gardens, though faint, take on a rhythmic patterned footsteps in gravel, the chirp of a wren, a single bell tolling somewhere deeper in the palace. These notes form a background score, slow and composed. The king remains seated, unmoving, but within, something aligns. Not a thought formed, but a sensation clarified. He is not preparing for the next obligation. He is inhabiting this one. The act of stillness is itself part of the design. He watches the light shift along the wooden floorboards, creating soft angles, marking the subtle tilt of the sun. Shadows of the window lattice stretch like elongated fingers, then blur as a cloud drifts overhead. Even the passing of clouds here seems unhurried. Outside, a gardener brushes past a hedge. A few birds scatter in his wake, and return almost instantly to their perches. The natural world beyond the palace wall continues its rhythm, but it too seems softened, aligned with the measured breath of the day. Inside, the porcelain vessel has cooled. The king places it gently on the table, his fingertips grazing its curved edge a moment longer before releasing it. The warmth remains in his hands. He exhales once, deeply, then leans back, allowing the chair to support his full weight. No one knocks. No one enters. The minutes pass like leaves falling in slow motion. The soft ticking of a distant clock is the only marker of time, and even that seems muffled by the velvet and wood. The king closes his eyes again, this time not to listen, but to rest. Not sleep, not yet, but a deeper kind of pause. The kind that nourishes. That resets not the schedule, but the soul. Somewhere in the east wing, a curtain is drawn, and sunlight shifts again. The sound of running water, distant and gentle, reaches the room, a fountain reawakened. The world continues its turn, but here it moves slowly, as if reluctant to disturb what has taken root in this space. When the king opens his eyes once more, he does not stand. He simply breathes, present in a world where even the churning of the hour arrives with quiet grace. As the day continues its unhurried unfoldment, the edges of morning begin to soften. Versailles remains wrapped in the golden hush of late morning, not yet nudged by the urgency of the noon hour. Everything has settled into a rhythm so gentle, so evenly measured, that it feels as if time itself is pausing, resting on the breath of quiet air. The king has not spoken, nor given orders. There is no need. His world moves according to a different kind of clock, one guided by light and space, ritual and breath. Within these walls, the notion of command has evolved into presence. The highest authority is silence, and the most complete expression is stillness. In the garden, the fountains begin to flow with greater strength, but their sound remains melodic and soft. Water arcs and falls in gentle symmetry, like silver ribbons drawn in the air, breaking the quiet only to enrich it. Light dances on the water's surface, throwing flickers of gold onto the marble statues nearby. The world glimmers quietly, a living painting in slow motion. Birdsong continues, layered but low, as if even the creatures of the sky understand the palace's whispered code. Doves coo gently beneath stone cornices. A squirrel navigates the upper terrace in silence, its claws making no more noise than dust stirred by wind. Inside, the king has returned to a different chamber. This one, smaller and lined with deep blue damask, is not part of this public suite, but a retreat for quiet. The furniture is modest by Versailles standards, lacquered wood with warm gilding, a hearth with no fire, a chaise placed beneath a tall window draped in silk. He sits, not because the day demands it, but because it welcomes the rest. The sun has moved again, and now its light slants differently, casting long soft beams through the glass. Shadows lean across the floor, slow and unbroken. The room's stillness becomes its own music, punctuated only by the distant, occasional creak of the building's ancient bones. A floorboard adjusts. A pane of glass hums lightly as the breeze kisses its surface. On a small table, an open book lies untouched. Its pages are heavy with illuminated script, not read today, but appreciated for its presence. A bowl of fruit sits beside it, figs, a pear, a cluster of pale grapes gathered from the gardens earlier that week. Their color, in this quiet light, appears muted, tender. They are not there for consumption. They are part of the room's gentle quiet. A breeze stirs the silk curtain. It flutters, then stills. And in that pause, the king closes his eyes again, not in fatigue, but in meditation. The stillness is now so deep that even thought moves softly. He is not reviewing decrees or planning audiences. He is simply here, in this body, in this breath, in this place. A servant passes outside the chamber, footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. He does not knock. He has no message. His task has already been performed. All things are as they should be. The light has become more golden now, almost amber. The dust in the air glows faintly, like embers floating above unseen coals. The warmth is not oppressive. It is a soft, encompassing embrace, a comfort that does not demand attention. Time, by now, has lost even its suggestion of structure. There are no bells, no voices, no duties pressing forward. The palace itself seems to recline, to lower its shoulders. The great halls exhale. The gardens still whisper, but slower now, like the final lines of a poem spoken before silence. The king shifts slightly, his hand resting on the edge of the chaise. His breathing is slow and steady. Though awake, he drifts along the edges of consciousness, the way a leaf drifts atop a pond. Nothing tethers him. Nothing calls him away. In this final movement of the morning, it is not transition that defines the moment, but merging. The border between wakefulness and rest dissolves. The marble floors, the painted ceilings, the velvet walls, all are still, and yet deeply alive, bearing the soft pulse of Versailles heart. A dove coos again. The sound, from somewhere beyond the window, calls like a lullaby. Another curtain stirs, and a thin sliver of light shifts across the king's lap. He does not open his eyes. He does not need to. Somewhere far below, the kitchens begin preparing for the day's next chapter. But their sounds are swallowed by distance and stone. The clink of metal, the soft murmur of voices, they do not intrude. They flow past the king like wind through tall grass, that his chest rises and falls. The breath is calm, even, not sleep, not yet, but something just as profound, a union with stillness, a communion with the in-between. There is peace here, and depth, and warmth. The chaise beneath him has conformed to his form. The damask wall coverings dampen even the faintest sound. His mind rests on nothing in particular. Memory has slowed. Thought has dimmed. Only sensation remains, light, warmth, breath. Eventually, the shadow of the curtain merges with the shade of the wall. The distinction between objects fades, softened by the light's embrace. There are no sharp angles now, no pressing shapes. Only the room and the king and the hush between them. The book remains open. The fruit bowl remains full. The curtain stills. And at last, the king reclines fully, head resting back, limbs at ease. The day has not ended, but the morning, its pageantry, its ritual, its rhythm, has drawn to a close. The silence does not signify absence. It signifies fullness, the completion of a sacred portion of time, as if the entire palace and the entire world has offered the king not just duty, but gentleness. And now, so too shall we rest. Let your breath slow. Let your shoulders fall. Feel the hush of the palace settle over you, like a velvet blanket drawn close. Let the rhythm of this quiet morning wrap around you, as if you too are part of Versailles. There is no need to rise. There is no task awaiting. Only the soft dimming of the world around you, the sound of doves, and the golden hush of stillness. As the king rests, so may you. May your dreams be soft and your night be kind. Good night. And until we meet again.